You are watching Procurement and Supply Chain Live, and this session features Peter Bonney. Peter is the co-founder and CEO of Vendorful, a B2B software company focused on improving all aspects of supplier engagement. Prior to Vendorful, Peter was a partner at QVT Financial LP, an alternative asset manager. He holds a degree in applied mathematics from Harvard College and lives in New York City with his wife, son, and the all-important dog. Today, Peter is going to talk about the critical importance of supplier visibility. So welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm very pleased to be here.
Great to have you here, Peter. I'm going to hand over to you now for your presentation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Right, so welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today. And as Scott said, I'm going to be talking about the critical importance of supplier visibility. As Scott mentioned, this is something near and dear to my heart. Vendorful is a company whose mission is about improving your supplier engagement. That includes having better visibility into your supplier relationships. So to get started, I want to talk about what supplier visibility actually is. When I talk about supplier visibility, I'm really talking about the question, what do I know about my suppliers? So that's, data about those suppliers, things that are kind of universal truths like tax IDs, but also information about your supplier relationships that's specific to your company, how much you're spending with them, agreements, contracts, the specific products and services you're using from them. It also includes data gleaned from your relationship, so risk data, performance data, or potentially from third-party data sources. And I'm mentioning this because I don't want to confuse it with supply chain visibility, which is really about the question, where's my stuff? So we're talking about what do I know about my suppliers and my relationship with them. So to set the stage here, I want to kind of frame a couple of questions about procurement's mandates with supplier relationships today. And I want to ask a question to everybody. Does your organization expect procurement to play a role in supplier risk management? If you are at a typical organization, the answer is very much yes. Now, the thing is that when you poll CPOs, most of them are actually not very confident in their organization's ability to identify supplier operational risk. About 60% of CPOs don't have a lot of confidence in their organization's ability to identify risk. When you probe a little bit deeper to look at the barriers they perceive to actually achieving that goal, it turns out to not be about a lack of systems or even a lack of budget. That only ranks in the top 3, but not until number 3. Really, it's about having quality data and integration between existing applications. So, having the information they need and getting systems to speak with each other, existing systems already, not so much about needing a major new investment in technology. So another question, again, to kind of frame some of the stuff that comes up with supplier visibility is whether your organization has given procurement any mandates on supplier diversity. And again, if you are in a typical organization, the answer is going to be yes. 70% of organizations globally have some kind of medium to high priority supplier diversity goals. Only about 30% have either not identified any goals or given them low priority. And a big barrier here to achieving supplier diversity goals is actually having visibility into what your supplier diversity situation looks like today. A plurality of organizations actually can't say off the top of anyone's head what their spend on diverse suppliers is right now. It's either a very manual exercise to collect that information, or they can't answer it at all because they don't have the data to begin with. So, I'm asking these questions not because this is all that supplier visibility is about, but it gives a flavor of the kinds of problems that procurement faces, the kinds of challenges that you're tasked with, and how a lack of information can hamper your ability to execute on those mandates. So these mandates are kind of ever increasing, but the visibility into your supply base, generally speaking, is not at most companies. And this leads to a number of potential problems. So most obviously, if you don't have visibility into your supply base, you don't have great visibility into supplier performance and risk. A consequence of that lack of immediate visibility is you have to go through very manual supplier performance assessments that typically involves collecting data in spreadsheets and doing it over email, following up with people, trying to get people to answer questions, spending a lot of time doing that. As a result of it being so time intensive and manual, assessments are either done very infrequently, so at most maybe once a year, or you have to kind of pick and choose what subset of suppliers you're going to assess regularly. So maybe just your top end suppliers if you're most critical and you're not actually getting a full picture of your supply base. Or in a lot of organizations, if you're running these assessments at all, they're run on an ad hoc basis. So, typically, reactive to a situation that happens. There's some incident that makes you question the performance of a supplier. And so there's a supplier assessment done, or they're done at the time of a major project or an onboarding or something like that, but not done on a regular systematic basis. Another consequence is that supplier risk management is reactive rather than proactive. So if you don't have a lot of ready visibility into risk data about your suppliers, you're kind of addressing problems after they happen. That's sort of the trigger to go and do a risk assessment. Oftentimes that means organizations are so busy fighting the last fire, there's not a lot of planning for the next one. And so it's not a kind of strategic exercise. It's sort of a reactive tactical exercise. And if you're doing risk assessments on an ad hoc basis, as a consequence, you're almost certainly doing risk mitigation on an ad hoc basis as well. And again, that's not a strategic way to approach supplier risk management. Related to lack of visibility on performance and risk, if you don't have good information on performance and risk, then you can't align spend with performance and risk. So as a result, spend is often allocated without sufficient regard to risk and performance. If you're not sort of allocating spend based on risk and performance, then you're allocating it on other factors, most typically on inertia. It's very easy to kind of keep doing what you're doing and allocating business in the way you're already allocating it, working with the same suppliers that you're working with today in the same proportion. This can lead to a lot of supplier complacency. They're not sort of feeling the pressure to constantly be innovating and being proactive and improving their relationship with you. And in general, this situation is a suboptimal or sometimes non-existent methodology for awarding business. In the absolute worst case, these gaps can mask fraud, as we saw in the recent high-profile case with Apple, where there was a misalignment between the performance of a set of suppliers and the allocation of business to that set of suppliers. And so somebody was able to put their thumb on the scale and receive kickbacks from people they were responsible for working with. Kind of related is that if you don't have sort of a global picture of your supplier relationship, that data exists somewhere and it's typically going to be siloed. So if you're a large organization, that might be siloed between offices. If you're a small organization, it might be siloed between people. A consequence of that is that you can often miss risks and opportunities that are visible inside your own data, but you're not accessing it and drawing that out. And so, the organization as a whole is not able to act on the data that sort of lives somewhere inside the organization because it's not surfaced to the level it needs to be surfaced to. This can mean that there are mishaps with suppliers that would have been preventable if information had gotten sort of from person A to person B, or sort of risen up to the right level, or been aggregated with the right other data. But it can also mean, missed opportunities. So, there might be opportunities for improved, processes, other forms of innovation, meeting diversity goals. If just, the information that's in person A's head made it to person B, and they were able to kind of, synergize that information. And again, worst case scenario here, there can be incidents that might be addressed early and mitigated early, but then escalate because, again, the information doesn't get around the organization to the places that can act on it. And then finally, if you have kind of a lack of a global visibility into your suppliers, there can be kind of a siloed compliance issue that arises. If you have duplicative onboarding and compliance processes, either across regions or across divisions, or just even within sort of different people in the organization, that can create an unclear responsibility for enforcing compliance standards. It can also create a kind of complacency with missing or incomplete information. So if you sort of get used to the idea that you don't have access to all the information you need, but somebody else probably does, and you can go to them when you need it. You start to assume that that information is there. The last 5 times I needed this document, Carol had it, and the last 6 times I needed this other document, Bob had it. And that's usually going to be true until all of a sudden it isn't. And then sort of a related consequence to this is that if this kind of siloed approach to compliance persists, you can have a lot of very small compliance gaps that are perceived by individuals in the organization, and kind of become tribal knowledge in like a local office or with an individual. You have many people seeing a bunch of small problems and nobody kind of putting it together into a single bigger problem that actually exists. Okay, but it's not just problems. There are benefits that can come, tangible benefits that can come from improving supplier visibility. Better performance, reduced risk, enhanced compliance, and better tracking against the goals that procurement has. So with better visibility, you get a complete picture of supplier risk and performance. And this means a holistic view of financial factors around your suppliers, ESG data, country risk, early warning indicators like customer churn and things like that can, maybe not kind of your traditional financial metrics, but can give you some indication about things you might want to worry about in the future. And then importantly, internal stakeholder sentiment about your suppliers, again, kind of as an early signal for what's happening with your supply base. Now, this picture might include third-party data. There's a lot of great data sources out there for enriching your internal data about your suppliers, but it can't rely on third-party data. There's nobody out there in the world that understands your organization's unique needs and experiences like your own people do. What you really need to do is sort of unlock that data that lives in people's heads or lives in siloed systems or in people's email and spreadsheets, and maybe enhance that with third-party data, but collect it all in one place, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The other thing that you can start to do when you get better visibility into your suppliers is you can track your interactions with suppliers kind of more fully and start to engage more deeply with your suppliers. So a huge number of organizations engage with their suppliers primarily with phone, with email, and in-person meetings. And that's never going to change, right? Phone and email is the main form of communication that we have in business. And that's fine. They're great tools for that. Excel is a very powerful tool for sharing information. But when that information is not captured, when those interactions are not captured, in call notes that everybody on your team can assess and revisit in the future, that information is sort of lost to history. Now, sales teams have figured this out a long time ago. I mean, this is a core functionality of CRM systems, but procurement can benefit from it just as much as sales does. And the real benefit here from starting to capture that information systematically and making it available to your whole team as needed is that you can spend less time on the busy work of your supplier interactions, kind of repetitive requests for documents, repetitive interactions. Please email this thing to me that you already emailed to Carol 5 weeks ago, and spend more time pursuing higher value add interactions with your suppliers and working on more complex projects and deepening the relationship. And really that all comes just from starting to track information that, again, your organization already has. It's just not captured. Okay, so the really good news about all of this is that it's not hard to improve supplier visibility. Every organization can start doing it today. It doesn't require a major overhaul of systems or processes. So this doesn't require ripping out an ERP, doesn't require ripping out a P2P system. The main thing you need to do is you need to make a decision to identify what your single source of truth about your suppliers is going to be. It could be an existing system. It could be, a new system like Venderful that integrates with your existing systems or, many of our peers. It could even be like a general knowledge app like OneNote or Microsoft Power BI, something that you already have a license for in your company and you just aren't using in this way. And, different solutions are going to work better or worse for different organizations depending on the size and the type of organization. But it does not require an overhaul and a ripping out of major systems that you've made significant investment in over the years. So the first stage that you're going to want to achieve in improving your supplier visibility is just getting that single source of truth about supplier information and engagements. So having everything that you know about a supplier, just kind of objective data in a single place. That's your master data like tax IDs and things, your contracts, compliance documents. Importantly, the key contacts at your suppliers. I mean, this is actually something that people spend a huge amount of time just tracking down who's the right person to talk to and keeping track of it. If somebody in your organization is the person who knows who to talk to at a supplier and that person leaves, then you have to kind of go through a whole rigmarole just to figure out who to talk to. And it's a big waste of time. Also gathering notes and call logs, like I said, and collecting spend data, collecting data from your internal systems to a single place. Ideally, you will make this information accessible to every stakeholder in your organization, everyone who's interacting with those suppliers. But the key thing is to gather it first, and then the sharing is something that you can figure out over time. The next level, sort of beyond gathering the kind of objective information about your suppliers, is gathering a single shared source of truth about supplier performance. So like I was talking about earlier, this is getting data that already exists in your company, either in people's heads or in an ERP or in your P2P system, in your accounting system, and collecting it into a single place, turning it into actionable, visible data about the performance of your suppliers. This is quantitative metrics, things like on time and full data that you can probably collect out of your ERP if you just kind of transform it a little bit, but also qualitative performance metrics, so stakeholder surveys. You can turn these things and combine the quantitative and the qualitative into KPIs, into comparisons between suppliers, into scorecards, and start to actually really make intelligent comparisons and value-added comparisons between your suppliers within categories. Now, ideally, you can make this information accessible to suppliers on an as-needed basis as well. But first step, gathering the information in the first place. And then finally, once you've kind of collected your single source of truth about your suppliers, your single source of truth about supplier performance, you can start to develop a shared source of truth about the overall supply base and collecting a picture of what's going on with larger business trends. And this is the sort of thing that's going to start really adding value to people outside of procurement, people in operations, the C-suite. There's data about your suppliers and about your supply base and about your business overall that's locked in your kind of internal understanding of your suppliers. You're not going to get from third-party data. You're not going to get from market data. But it isn't aggregated at most organizations into something that can provide these kinds of insights. And again, as I said, this doesn't necessarily require a major investment in new tools. It requires collecting the data. And these sorts of dashboards can be built in Power BI. They can even be built in Excel. It's really a question of the amount of time that you're investing and the collection of the data and the aggregation of the data and having it in one place. So in summary, like I've discussed today, supplier visibility is critical for procurement's core functions and its increasing mandates and executing on those mandates. If you lack visibility, that results in increased risk and it reduces the overall performance of your supply base. Improving the visibility into your supply base brings a lot of tangible business benefits. And the biggest thing is that getting improved visibility doesn't require a major investment in tools. You may already have most of the tools that you need. You just need to start collecting the data and investing in centralizing it and getting it visible to the right people. And that's it.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. Slight delay there in me coming back to you. I was just finishing my notes actually from your presentation.
Excellent.
Really interesting insight there. Thank you for that. I do have some questions. You'll be pleased to hear.
Yeah, please.
Now, to kick off, I mean, there's lots of firms and lots of people probably watching this that are probably thinking, well, I've got maybe thousands or even tens of thousands of suppliers. How can procurement and supply chain teams stay on top of risks of that scale. I mean, it's challenging to be proactive if that means regularly reviewing every single supplier record.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a big challenge that a lot of organizations that we talk to face. They've got, sometimes, as you said, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of records. One of the first things that it's inevitable, one of the first conversations we have with new customers is, okay, we want to start importing our supplier data into your system. First, we need to go through a big data cleanup exercise. It doesn't have to be that difficult. I think the main thing is developing some automation and reminders and pushing, frankly, as much of that work onto your suppliers as possible. So a lot of systems, like Venderful and other products out there, will kind of push the maintenance of that data onto your suppliers. So they're responsible for updating things on a schedule, and it only rises to the procurement on sort of an exception basis that this document is out of date, it's 30 days past due, they're not responding, those sorts of things. But that can also be done with just having a practice in place with reminders, with good tracking of this information. But the key is, like, put the work onto your suppliers. You're paying for them to do it, and they want to do it, and they will do it.
Yeah, I like the idea of pushing it onto the suppliers. I interviewed one CPO. I won't say what company it was from, but they were talking about their digital transformation and their suppliers. And he said something like 2% of their suppliers, and these are one of those organizations that have tens of thousands of suppliers. We said 2% of them didn't even have email. Yeah, exactly. Raised eyebrows indeed. So obviously there's a challenge there, just digitizing some of this data and the digital transformation to begin with.
Interesting. Crazy.
Yeah. Okay, another question here. Now, lots of companies already track supplier data in their ERP systems. A lot of that data is stale, for want of a better word. How do you ensure that your supplier data stays fresh and current?
Yeah, so this, I think, really does actually start, and maybe I should have talked about this in the presentation. It does start with naming that single source of truth about your supplier data. So modern ERPs all have APIs, and you can integrate other systems with them. So once you've identified, okay, this is going to be where our data lives. This is going to be the place where, the data may live in other places. It may get pushed out to our ERP, but this is the place that is the truth. And then, identifying that central source of truth, you can then integrate through, an API to your ERP and make sure that your ERP is up to date. We've even seen, as crazy as this is, we've seen organizations that have, up to 8, 10, sometimes more ERP systems across different regions, as opposed to having a single ERP for the whole organization. And, they have existing challenges syncing data between ERPs because they have suppliers that are serving both regions, right? And so, forget just stale data. They have inconsistent data about the same supplier in different systems. And the solution there really is, okay, name an external source of truth, and that is going to be the one that reconciles, like, this is the place, where I know about this supplier, and this system is the one that's responsible for pushing it into ERP A, P2P system B, and keeping it up to date that way.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's so logical. It's just it's turning that theory into practice, like you say, when companies have all these systems, and when you're a global organization as well,
Yes.
That creates extra challenges, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it does require, look, the larger the organization, the greater investment in time it's going to take, of course, to coordinate these different systems. And you have stakeholders in different countries. But also, when you are a larger organization, you're going to have access to more resources to do this. And frankly, again, pushing work onto your suppliers. Your ERP provider is a supplier as well, and they want your business. And if you ask them for help, they will help you.
Okay, and talking about business brings me nicely onto my final question. So how should procurement and supply chain leaders craft an ROI story to get buy-in for specific tools to import supplier visibility?
Yeah, that's really kind of always the critical question, right? It's everything sounds great. how do I get, my CFO, whoever to sign off on this? I think the key thing is to, from my perspective, to emphasize that, well, two things. It's the investment upfront is not going to be significant. And then probably a hidden benefit of this that appeals to a lot of organizations is what you're really talking about is getting more value out of existing systems you're already paying a lot of money for, right? So ERP systems, P2P systems, they're very expensive, and they're very time consuming to implement. Nobody wants to go through an exercise of putting in a new one, right? And waiting 2 years, 3 years, however long it takes. When somebody comes to a CFO, a CIO, and says, hey, we have this plan that's going to collect data from our existing systems and is going to help extend the life of these systems, because we're going to start getting more value out of them and using them to add value to the business in new ways. That's a very appealing story, because it's like, okay, great. Like, probably sitting on their desk somewhere is a plan that someone proposed for, like, hey, I want to, put in a new ERP system in, 2023. And they're thinking like, oh God, like, I don't want to go through this and I don't want to pay for it. And then somebody else comes to them with a plan saying like, well, actually, this is a way that we are going to, get a lot of the benefits out of, a new investment in an ERP or whatever, without investing in a new ERP. That's a very, very appealing story.
Absolutely. Okay, look, Peter, that's all we've got time for right now, I'm afraid. But thank you so much for your presentation. Peter Bonney, co-founder and CEO of Venderful.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Okay, and remember, if you have any more questions for Peter, or you'd like to network with him directly, you can reach out through the event app, which is called Brella. And that's where you can speak to all of our speakers and all of our attendees as well, who are joining us in person, but also virtually. So make sure you download the app, and you can engage with Peter and ask him any more questions you might have about the critical importance of supplier visibility. But stay tuned. We'll be right back with the next session.